Amid a violent storm, a large plane in flames plunges from the sky toward the dense forest of a wild island. Among the wreckage of the airplane cabin, the pilot and his co-pilot wake up and search for the radio equipment to call for help. They spot the small radio on the ground, a few meters from where the cabin ended up hanging. Still badly injured, the co-pilot climbs down to retrieve the radio, passing what appear to be broken shells of giant eggs. Upon reaching the communicator, he examines a kind of biological tissue and realizes the danger when he sees how large it is. He then hears something approaching through the trees behind him, a dry, heavy sound of foliage being dragged and branches snapping, suggesting a large creature. The sound seemed to move with alarming speed. When he abruptly turns to see what could be the source of that threatening noise, he sees just a few meters away a colossal serpent staring straight at him. The creature's skin, a nearly black dark green with intricate patterns that camouflaged perfectly in the forest gloom, appeared thick and scaly, minimally reflecting the little light filtering through the dense canopy. Terror, a cold and paralyzing sensation, builds in his gaze. He tries to scream but can only watch, helpless. The attack is a devastating and inevitable arc, culminating in a massive bite against the co-pilot, who barely had time to raise his arms in a futile attempt at defense. Returning to a few hours before the crash occurs, the plane follows a calm journey, flying under a very cloudy sky. The crew performs standard in-flight service procedures, asking passengers to adjust their seats and lower their trays for the meal. While an elderly man snores calmly, enjoying the trip, beside him another young man looks worriedly at an insurance policy. Soon after, the man drifts into thoughts about the behavior of crabs in seafood markets. How they always try to escape but are almost always prevented, either by other crabs or by the limits of the environment itself, a metaphor for human life itself. He is brought back to reality by a flight attendant who offers him a glass of water. The man refuses, continuing his musings, saying he does not know when life became so difficult. A light turbulence causes the flight attendant to spill some water on one of the passengers seated further ahead. Upon seeing the woman's face, the man remembers the contact he had with her at the airport, making him recall the necklace he made with a smiley face sticker that he received from her before she left with her boyfriend. The crew in the cockpit chats calmly, unaware that they are heading toward a massive storm. The tranquility of the flight is suddenly interrupted by severe and abnormal turbulence, which violently shakes the aircraft, spreading panic among travelers as objects fly through the cabin and emergency alarms begin to sound. A lightning bolt strikes one of the plane's engines, damaging it and starting a fire on the wing. The pilots see on the navigation instruments that straight ahead there is an island not shown on the maps, but which could be their salvation, since a water landing would be far too risky. They begin the landing procedure with the aircraft shaking violently. Meanwhile, the man begins to have flashbacks of the events that led his life to ruin, such as his mother's death and an interrupted suicide attempt. Suddenly, the plane begins to break apart as it crashes into the ground. The man wakes up dazed and alone in the middle of a wild forest and sets out to search for other survivors of the disaster. After walking for a while through dense vegetation, he finds a scene of terror. The plane completely destroyed, people dead, and some others screaming in despair. He runs to help the woman he saw in the cabin save her boyfriend from the wreckage. And when she sees the man's face, somewhat confused, she calls him Hao Ren. The crew tries to care for the survivors as best they can. One of the survivors makes a confident speech, explaining that the group's only chance of survival would be for everyone to unite and walk toward the place where the plane cabin fell, because there was the radio transmitter, the only means of communication that would work in such a remote region. He reinforces that everyone must control their emotions and that they need water and food, then grabs a large spiky fruit he sees nearby and gives it a light slap. The fruit explodes in his hand like a grenade, spreading a highly corrosive liquid from its interior all over the man's body, who dies a few seconds later, serving as a warning that every element of that ecosystem is deadly and that survival will depend on constant vigilance. Another passenger tries to assume leadership of the group, estimating that it will take them at least 2 days to reach the site of the cabin crash. He speaks words of determination to raise everyone's confidence and begins the walk. However, a few steps later, he is devoured by a giant carnivorous plant. The group panics upon realizing they are surrounded by these plants, which, when opening their mouths, reveal the remains of their past prey. The survivors run in a desperate attempt to escape the threat, but the plants move like snakes, actively hunting many of them with ease. Hao Ren helps a man who protects his suitcase as if it were his life. When he falls to the ground and sees the insurance policy he carried earlier, and remembering people demanding money from him and the lawyer's words about the payment of 6 million that would be made if something happened to him, this ends up shaking his mind. He stands up and faces one of the carnivorous plants in an attempt to end that suffering, but shortly before the plant devours him, he is saved by one of the survivors who pushes him, removing him from the monster's line of attack. The plant prepares the next attack, but it is blocked by Ruan Ning, who stabs a pole into its gaping mouth. They head deeper into the forest, trying to lose the plants, until they reach a rocky stream that guarantees them a temporary refuge. One of the more experienced survivors explains that the island lies along a water current contaminated by nuclear waste, which may have caused the mutation in those plants. The group despairs when reflecting that other animals may also have suffered mutations due to pollution and evolved in an equally dangerous way, concluding that the only alternative for everyone's survival is to reach the plane cabin. They continue the journey upstream toward the crash site of the cabin, carefully crossing the rocks, moving further ahead into a large crevice between the rocks. The survivors follow the path with difficulty, while something lies in wait among the rocks. One of the last survivors in line notices the absence of another group member who had been right behind him, but continues on thinking he is hallucinating when suddenly something grabs his head and lifts him into the air. The other young man who was with him notices his sudden disappearance and runs to try to warn the rest of the group about what happened, but because he does not speak the same language as the rest of the group, everyone becomes confused and does not understand what the man is trying to say. Another survivor seems to have understood the foreigner's message, but just as he begins to explain it to everyone, he is interrupted by the attack of a monster, similar to a giant lizard endowed with a tongue that projects like that of a chameleon, capturing its prey from long distances. The man is devoured in a matter of seconds, while other lizards approach the group, which flees desperately through the monster-infested ravine. They pass through a narrow gap in the rocks when one of them gets stuck between the stones. A group member tries to push the man in desperation to pass as well. When he notices the imminent attack of one of the beasts, he narrowly dodges the attack and then finally manages to pull his companion out of the crevice. Part of the group manages to escape the ravine to an area of higher vegetation. Hao Ren, Ruan Ning, and another survivor are left behind. When one of the monsters tries to capture the other survivor, but fails to pull him due to his overweight. The lizard then changes target, attacking Ruan Ning. However, Hao Ren grabs the woman by the arm, preventing her from being dragged into the monster's jaws, which then releases her and launches a new attack, now striking Hao Ren himself. The woman holds on to him tightly when a second lizard captures him as well, leading the man to decide to surrender himself to the monsters after declaring his feelings to the young woman. He lets go and is pulled away, but ends up being saved by the other survivor, who jumps and intercepts Hao Ren in midair, causing the two monsters to become tangled in their own tongues, providing the perfect opportunity for the group to escape, running through the tall vegetation. The lizards try to follow them, but something in the vegetation makes them retreat, as if they sensed that a greater danger dominated that area. The survivors scatter amid the tall vegetation and try to regroup again. Ruan Ning talks to Hao Ren about the declaration he made earlier, and says that when she returned from a trip she went to visit him at his house, but did not find him. This makes Hao Ren recall the moment when he was about to end his life because of his mother's death. Suddenly, his younger brother confronts him, asking whether that really is the solution he thinks is best, ultimately showing that he does not care about his death since the family's ruin is attributed to him. Hao Ren then speaks with a lawyer about leaving his inheritance to his younger brother in case something happened to him. The group continues through the vegetation without knowing that a huge serpent is lying in wait. The young Jupace meets part of the group and says that he felt something large was chasing him, when then the serpent emerges with one of the victims in its mouth, causing panic among the others. Hearing the screams, Hao Ren lifts Ruan Ning onto his shoulders so she can try to see what happened. She then sees the enormous tail of the serpent coming toward her and striking her directly and knocking her down. The terrified group watches in silence through the vegetation when the serpent appears again and devours the captured young man in front of everyone. The panicked group runs frantically without thinking twice. They head to another ravine and try to hide from the serpent that approaches cautiously, searching for its next prey. Everything falls silent, increasing the tension even more. When then the serpent begins to approach Ruan Ning, who tries at all costs to remain silent. Seeing the woman he loves in danger, in an act of desperation and hopelessness, Hao Ren draws the monster's attention to himself while venting about his frustrated life. The serpent prepares to strike Hao Ren, who is saved once again by Juho, who, realizing they are under trees with explosive fruits, throws one of them against the others, causing chain explosions that injure and drive the enormous serpent away from the area. As darkness falls, the group seeks refuge in a cave where they can spend the night safely. The survivors work together to light a campfire in the cave when an elderly woman recognizes Ruan Ning's companion from television, saying that his parents must be very proud of him. This seems to make him slightly uncomfortable, causing him to leave to patrol the area. All of this makes Hao Ren have another daydream about crabs, but he soon regains consciousness when he notices that the elderly man of the group is observing something on the wall. He claims it is oil and takes some with cotton to light the fire. Hao Ren offers his necklace to be used as a fire starter, making Ruan Ning sad when he says that it no longer means anything to him. The elderly man remembers his wife and says that he began traveling with her before she passed away, saying that while one is alive, one must live honorably and happily. Ruan Ning says that Hao Ren's brother ended up going bankrupt and that she had not seen him for a long time, but that in their last meeting he confessed to her that he missed his older brother. A loud noise is heard by the group in the distance, followed by a strong light among the trees. Thinking it might be a rescue team, Hao Ren, Ruan Ning's boyfriend, and the man with the briefcase decide to head toward that light to seek help. They advance cautiously through the open field when they are surprised by a new creature. The source of that light, a gigantic frog with a dangling organ on its head that emitted light like some abyssal fish. They hide from the monster under some rocks, but the third man notices that his suitcase is at the monster's feet and tries to retrieve it. The monster captures him, and the suitcase ends up opening, revealing that the man carried the ashes and some belongings of his small daughter. He is then devoured by the giant frog, which soon after tries to attack the other two young men. They come up with the idea of separating, ensuring the survival of at least one of them. Hao Ren runs in one direction, but soon realizes that he had been deceived by the other man, who stays still in the hiding place. The frog jumps toward Hao Ren, but something even larger snatches it in midair. The young man returns to the cave and tells the others that he was the only survivor of the encounter with the monster. Soon the gigantic serpent begins to circle the cave entrance, terrifying everyone. It disappears, and shortly afterward, Hao Ren returns to the cave with the child's ashes. In the morning, they bury the child's remains and continue their journey. They reach a clearing and realize that they are approaching the location where the plain cabin is. They notice on the ground a huge piece of snake skin, which puts them on alert again. The colossal serpent emerges and hurls a massive rock toward the group, which narrowly avoids the attack. The hunt then resumes. Everyone hides in gaps among the rocks, escaping through every crevice they find. The group manages to lose the monster and heads toward the final destination. They enter a cave and proceed through a steep and slippery passage. The elderly man slips, but Hao Ren and Ruan Ning's boyfriend manage with great difficulty to hold him. However, the serpent approaches, and the young man ends up letting the old man fall into the ravine, where he falls straight into the serpent's mouth, which then escapes into the depths of the cave. Hao Ren considers letting the young man fall into the ravine as well, but changes his mind and saves him. After leaving the cave and with everyone safe, Hao Ren confronts the young man about letting the elderly man fall, and the young man retorts saying that the monster is not him but Hao Ren. He pulls Hao Ren's insurance policy from his pocket, saying that he knows his plan was to stage an accident to obtain the insurance money. Juth comforts him, saying that he would testify in his favor once they got out of that place. The group advances and finds some plane wreckage, indicating that they were getting closer to possible salvation. They climb the mountain with difficulty and reach the site of the plane cabin crash. The group enters the cabin and begins searching for the radio transmitter. The flight attendant finds the pilot still in his seat, but when she approaches, she is frightened to see that he is dead and ends up falling onto the aircraft controls, causing one of the engines to be activated. She manages to shut down the engine, and luckily the wind caused by it ends up revealing the position of the transmitter. Hao Ren goes in search of the radio and sees the co-pilot's bloodied clothes on the ground. The group is then attacked by the serpent they encountered at the beginning of the journey. Hao Ren attacks the creature with an axe, and it throws him to the ground, attacking him viciously as if it remembered the attack it suffered before, which caused blindness in one of its eyes. Ruan Ning grabs the axe and attacks the serpent as well to save Hao Ren. The serpent prepares to strike Ruan Ning, but Hao Ren pulls her at the last moment. The two hide under the plane door when two more serpents approach. The young man goes down to try to save them, but ends up escaping the area when he sees the other serpents approaching. He then reappears in the plane with a plan. He draws the serpent's attention by banging on the plane's carcass. When the two new serpents approach, he shouts for them to turn on the engine, but the plan fails due to a malfunction that prevents the engine from starting. One of the serpents begins attacking the survivors, swallowing the elderly woman. The second serpent tries to attack the flight attendant, but Juho places himself in front of her and is attacked in her place. However, the effort is in vain, since the other serpent approaches from behind and attacks the poor woman. The young man sees the two serpents approaching to attack him, but suddenly the plane's engine is activated in a last effort by the flight attendant. The force of the engine begins to pull everything in front of it, and the devastating suction draws in the snake that was attacking Hao Ren and Ruan Ning, dragging it toward the engine where it is completely shredded. Everyone ends up falling to the ground, but they are unharmed. After the turbulent moment, Ruan Ning's boyfriend then reveals that inside the cave it was not he who let go of the elderly man's hand, but the old man himself who released his grip. Under the plane's smoke, they see the colossal serpent approaching, and unfortunately, in a precise strike, it swallows the young man who could do nothing. Hao Ren and Ruan Ning watch the scene in shock, but soon begin to run back to the cabin to seek shelter. The serpent then wraps its entire body around the plane cabin and begins attacking it, trying to access its interior and reach its prey. The two watch everything in fear, but Hao Ren remembers and recites the phrase that Ruan Ning told him when she gave him the sticker, saying for him to smile more and that his luck would improve. He then wields the axe and begins opening a hole in the side of the plane, and they start to flee. Meanwhile, the remaining fuel of the aircraft begins to leak through the area, and the serpent, while pursuing the two, ends up soaking in it. Hao Ren and Ruan Ning run through a crevice in the rocks, and he strikes the walls with his necklace, generating sparks and heating the metal intensely. In an epic scene, he throws the hot metal toward the serpent's mouth, causing the liquid to combust, completely burning the gigantic serpent in a shower of flames that illuminates the entire area. The monster attempts one last strike, but does not withstand the injuries. Hao Ren and Ruan Ning narrowly escape the monster's attack. Like a great miracle, the radio transmitter begins to call, and a voice is heard requesting a response from the survivors, thus ending that cycle of torment and pursuit.